Great. Thank you all for taking time to talk to us today about Measure 26246, which is a renewal of the Portland Teachers Levy. There's a lot of you on the call today, but perhaps Dr. Husk, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself real quick and telling us a little bit about what this campaign is about.
Sure. So I'm the interim superintendent here for Portland Public Schools. I started February 12th and should be finished by June 30th. Honored to be here. My best understanding of the renewal for the school levy is this has been several years now of the Portland community supporting this school levy for us to have additional money for additional teachers. And the number of teachers this has been supporting, according to HR this morning, is pretty close to 700 teachers. And it is not a tax rate increase. I think Julia Brim-Edwards and Chair Hollins have more of a history of how the school tax came to be, and that's my understanding at this point.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take it next, and then I can hand it off to Gary. So just as sort of go back to how the local option came to be. So after ballot measure 5 passed, and the state legislature then had the responsibility to fund schools, and also at the same time they were going through the process of equalization so that all the different levels of funding that happened across the state, they were attempting to equalize. At that time, they decided to give districts also a local option, which allows districts to raise a set amount of money that's limited locally. And so PPS had its first local option in 2000. And then when it was renewed in 2007, the rate went up. And then since then, it's been renewed several times. It's a 5-year levy. The last time we renewed it was 2019. The rate is the same as the 2019 rate. So the rate, this is truly a renewal, not an increase. So the rate stays the same. And as before, it's going to fund primarily teaching positions, approximately 655. Gary, I don't know if you want to take the pass from there.
Yep, you muted, Gary.
I should know this by now. Like, we've been doing this for a while now. So one of the reasons why, what this is really going to fund, just the brass tacks, is, classroom teachers, right? Reading specialists, educational assistants, other support services, with students with academic, behavioral, or mental health issues, especially, in the aftermath of the pandemic. And so, when we're looking at what it's going to do, the bottom line is it's going to, fund our teachers. If we don't do this, it's going to be catastrophic, because I look at it like this, the future and the success of our city is going to depend on the investment we make right now. And so I look at this as an investment. And if we don't invest now, the future of the city will suffer, right? And in the short term, if we don't get this passed, we're going to have layoffs, of teachers layoffs. We're going to have freezes. We're going to have difficulty in hiring new teachers to Portland. It can result in even larger class sizes than we have currently. And it is, and most importantly, it's going to be the overall educational experience of our students who loses with this. And so I feel that's one of the main reasons why, and this is what we spend our money on, but why we spend it on as well. And, Director Brim-Edwards will speak to the emphasis of how we've been spending our money from this bond. And I'm going to turn it over there to Director Brim-Edwards.
Yeah, for the last several levies, it's primarily been classroom teachers, but as Director or Chair Hollins said, it has the ability to fund more sort of classroom facing positions as well. Maybe that could be education assistants or reading specialists. It's important to note that, as you said, it was about over 650 teachers, but those are that the amount the levy raises is with the rate that stays the same will be about 100 million next year. And what's important to note is that this year, it's about 109. So because of what is happening with the commercial properties downtown, the amount we collect, if we keep the rates the same, is actually going to be less. And Miyang, I know you're going to correct me if I got those numbers slightly wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 100. Okay, thank you. 100 million. So even with a flat rate, we actually will raise less money.
Great, thank you. And does that help explain some of the decrease in the number of teachers that this would fund versus the 2019 levy? That, as well as, I guess, raises and increased benefits.
Yeah, you've got the two things that primarily would drive the overall cost of the number of teachers you can afford with that amount of money.
So I guess my first question is, why isn't this a state problem? Why is this something that Portlanders have to fund versus the state legislature?
I'll take that one because we absolutely agree with you that this is really a state problem, and this was the same argument that we made in the back in last century when I was lobbying the legislature, that this was a state responsibility with ballot measure 5, and one of the promises to voters were that the state was going to essentially fund education. What they found is when they took over the funding of it, both the state funding, but also this equalization cost a lot more than they thought. So they've never adequately funded our schools. And so, like I say, they gave districts the mechanism. And we're fortunate in Portland that we can utilize this mechanism because a lot of districts can't. But you're absolutely right, Helen. This should be a state responsibility. And in the absence of them not fully funding our schools, they gave us a tool that we can add some supplemental funding ourselves.
And
we're going to go down and I'm sorry, I'm just saying there will be, and I know Sandy has already had discussions with other superintendent of larger districts about what our strategy for next session, but that won't the likelihood that they're going to increase the state budget enough to fill this particular hole. It probably would have to be over $1 billion. They'd have to add, we took $1 billion and then ran it through the formula for us to get 100 million.
And you're talking about $1 billion to the state school fund as a whole, not just.
Yeah, because if you take
Right.
I think PPS is at least it used to be about 8 to 9% of the overall total. So for us to get 100 million from the state to backfill this hole, we'd have to, because the formula I don't think is going to change to favor Portland. It'd have to be close to $1 billion.
And one other question, I think you have already answered this in effect. There is no chance of an overage of this levy going back to the state, is there? There was that concern about whether this would hit a cap, and that anything over that would have to be equalized through the equalization formulas into other districts, but it doesn't sound like that'll happen.
That's correct. It looks like, and Miyang, you can again correct me if I've got this wrong, but the original calculations had us hitting it at the end of this 5-year renewal. But because of the change in the property tax values and the fact that we're bringing in less money, we're further from the cap. Is that correct, Miyang? Essentially, a layperson's, I'm sure he'd explain it much more precisely, but.
That's right.
So it's still looming out there. It's just not with this, likely with this renewal.
So, is there enrollment is declining, and so one of the concerns is, will state funding drop even more within the life of this levy? Is this enough? should parents be expected or be expecting that there's going to be, even with this levy, significantly increased class sizes over the course of this 5-year term?
I mean, I have an answer, but it's anybody else can jump in if they.
Yeah, I don't know that I can predict over a 5-year term. I could say that if this levy doesn't pass, it will definitely be a significant impact on our ability to provide the level of teaching support that the community is used to. I can only go out like one more year and then maybe into the biennium. I don't know that I could answer it for 5 years, Ellen.
Are you confident that
We're going to have another round. We already know that we'll have another round of cuts next year, just based on our current budgeting and our current enrollment projections.
Are you confident that that the Portland community will support this? And there's been a lot of frustration this past year, both with the strike closing down schools for most of November, and with the winter closures, with makeup days that were not well attended either by teachers or students. Are you confident that the community support is there for what is still a sizable hit to people's property tax bills?
Yeah, I would love to talk to that. This is Angela Bonilla. So the reality is what we saw every day at our strike lines were hundreds of families showing up because Portland as a city cares about their schools, they care about their students, and they care about their educators. And the polling shows that we still have very high favorability around for educators and the union. And so we know that this community doesn't give up on its kids. And the reality is that this levy, which won't increase any property taxes because it's just a renewal, is what helps fund, as Dr. Huss said, a lot of the amazing programs in our district, right? So in order to make sure that we have, in addition to the art tax, comprehensive music, art, library, PE, as well as our CTE programs, our career and technical education programs. I mean, right now you can go to Madison and decide to take biomedical sciences to prepare for a future career. Like, that is pretty awesome. And those are the kinds of things that a levy like this funds. And so I'm confident that our city is going to do the same thing they did in November by coming down to our strike lines and our picket lines, which is support our students, support our teachers, and pass this levy.
I'll also just speak to since I've been a Portland school funding activist since 1998. When my first child went into kindergarten at PPS, is that people always feel passionate about different things that are happening in PPS. I know that very acutely, and at the end of the day, they also know that that the resources need to be there for us to be able to do the work, and that this isn't just a little side thing that is a small amount of money, but it's absolutely essential part of our funding stack. And so, like I say, I've been through the local income tax surcharges, every local option, every bond, and I'm confident that voters will see that this is a value. We did, I think, right size it for the time, because there was a conversation about whether clearly if the rate was raised, that could have raised additional funds that could have prevented some of the cuts that we're having to make. But knowing that right now that that people, because of the economy and just the overall rate of taxes, that wasn't the right ask to voters. So we feel this is the right size ask at this time. So obviously on May 21st, we'll know exactly what voters think, but knowing the school community really well, from parents, educators, grandparents, all of our alums. There is, as Angela said, a lot of support for, at the end of the day, people have their individual issue and they've got them with PPS that, they know that this, our schools will look radically different without these funds.
Yeah, I just want to say something on that too. This is for their kids, right? So when you have a direct connection for something that's going to affect your kid directly, it's a different mind frame than it is when you're talking about whether it's teacher salary or whether it's, what the board does. This is something that affects teachers' kids. I mean, the community's kids. And so their reaction and their thinking is totally different, regardless of, if this is a teacher thing or if this is a district thing. A lot of the community members is going to think this is my kid thing. And so this is why I feel it's going to definitely be supportive, because it's directly affect their kids.
So let me also ask, the board is looking to change the foundation policy, which, arguably is this kind of concept, but on a much smaller scale, where individual schools, parents connected to precisely where their kids are going to school, will just their use of that money will be restricted moving forward. They will not be able to hire individual educators or additional educators at their schools. And one of the concerns there is like, well, PPS, neither the PPS nor the state are fully responding to the needs at individual schools. So why does it make sense to do away with that kind of individual staffing plan at the foundation level, but not have that same argument at the district level, where really what needs to happen is districts band together to challenge the state?
I'm going to speak to that. Just as a person who's always worked at schools that were Title I, and in communities that did not have access to large foundations and galas that could fundraise for staffing, I think it's really important to note that these are all our kids. And that's the important thing about this levy. This levy is to support all of our students. Every school will lose staff if this levy does not pass, because that is how widespread this levy is, right? And so when we talk about foundations, I personally feel like that's an issue of, being double taxed. You already pay your taxes to fund schools, and yet you're being expected to fundraise to get adequate staffing. We know that that's important to come from the state, that we need to have a state that fully funds education, and that a foundation is just a Band-Aid, right? But when we have a levy that the whole city supports, that funds educators for every student, and that is specifically targeted for staffing in schools. So this money won't be used by our district for anything else, but providing additional, and continuing to keep our staffing at least where it is, by keeping those, almost 700 positions, I think is important to note. So, as frustrating as some folks might feel around the foundations and that policy change, I think, we need to work towards, like you've stated, advocating at the state. I know PPS is working on a strategy. OEA, our statewide organization, is working on a strategy. We are going to be hitting Salem hard, because our community now truly feels and understands the impacts of this continual underfunding for decades. And so, I think we are going to do what it takes to get every student and every school to be a great public school, and not just let us continue these Band-Aid solutions that actually widen the gap between students' achievement.
The other thing I would add is just it's inequitable. So currently we don't have, if you live on the west side where property taxes or property values are higher, they don't get to keep the higher local option amount. It all comes in centrally and then goes back out through a formula, which is exactly what's being proposed for having a district-wide foundation, which is what every other district in the state that has a foundation does, which is if you're going to buy staff, it happens centrally.
Right, but the staffing decisions are. But in terms of staffing, there is, a formula which we have supported in terms of lower income schools, Title I schools. They are going to get more staff per students. So I guess those decisions are, from what we're hearing, that is kind of some of the concerns among parents. And so I guess I'm wondering if just like how, if you do see a kind of parallel with what's happening in terms of, going to the PPS community for a levy.
So when I think about this stuff, and I'm just be blunt as I can, when we try to isolate individual things, whether it's the foundation or even the levy in itself, those things we're using because of the underfunding of education. And as long as we keep focusing on those things, it's like a scapegoat for the legislators not to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is funding our schools in a way that will make us be the top in the country in education. And so we can keep having these conversations about these individual pieces, but I think real conversations needs to be, how do we not let the state and the legislators off the hook for doing what they need to be doing? That's the conversation, right? If this levy doesn't go through, right, if the budget that we have to look forward to for our 25-26 season is still there, it's not going to matter what the foundation money is, because the gulf is going to be too big. And so we have to focus on how to fill that great gulf, not on the individual creeks, but we need to figure out how do we fund that ocean.
And it's the idea that eventually that you won't be coming back for a levy renewal.
Did I say that again?
Is the hope that eventually you won't have to be going back to the Portland community to ask for another levy renewal?
Absolutely. We should never have to have individual communities to fund a state educational institution. We shouldn't have to, as Portlanders, and I've been a homeowner and taxpayer, we should be no way we should be, doing this. This should be a state level piece. We should never have to do another levy. We should never have to worry about foundation funding. If we really care about our kids, if we keep saying our kids is our focus and our kids is our priority, then we need to fund it. I've said this before, when we make things a priority, we find the money. Right. So all I'm saying is that they need to find the money to make sure they keep our kids a priority.
Also, just going to go back to 1997 and 99. There were a lot of conversations about changing the formula to adjust the formula based on the cost of doing business. So obviously, if you're living in the Portland metropolitan area, the cost of living is way higher, and we need to pay our educators and all the rest of our staff wages. And I'm sure Angela could weigh in, like, that doesn't always happen just because of the market, but also from when we get to the state, they don't give us the same amount of money. If we were in money in Milton Freewater goes a lot further than it does in Portland. So the fact that the formula doesn't make any sort of adjustment for the cost of living, depending on where a district is operating, is another reason why it is harder for the larger metropolitan area school districts to get the same value of their money that they get that a district in a smaller, more rural area that has a lower cost of living would have. And I don't know, maybe Sandy, you could speak to what it's like. You were a superintendent of a district that didn't have a local option that was similar size, and what the difference between what we're able to offer students in Portland when we have a local option than if we didn't have 600 students.
Yeah, and then I will go there in just a second. I will say, when you say, Helen, we'll never have to again, I think that can be a concept and a vision, but I also think after 4.5+ decades of doing this, things change down the road. So we never knew we were going to be funding some of the security people that we fund way back when I first got started. I will say, I think Salem Kaiser and Portland Public are two really, really good school districts. They both have their own pride points and points of improvement. But I think one of the pride points in Portland Public is the very robust curriculum that we're offering here. To have dual language immersion in as many languages as we do. Angela just did a great job of describing the really amazing career tech offerings we have here. to have the visual and performing arts, to have, and I know some of this is volunteer, but the team that just won the National Constitution Award, I just heard today we have a student who won the state award in debate. There's a whole lot of things here in Portland Public Schools that you don't see in school districts across the whole nation or even across the state. And I think that's a real pride point. And I agree with Gary very much. When it's about your own children and you know that this is their 1 4th grade year, this is their 1 10th grade year, you want to support them in the best way you can. And if you're the neighbor or the grandparent, you feel the same way about your kids.
Great. Let's see, Angela, I wanted to ask you this. Throughout the strike, the message that was coming out from the teachers union was that PPS's administration was misspending its money. Are you still kind of standing behind that message, or what are you telling parents in terms of, why this is necessary versus, an issue more on PPS making different priorities and different decisions?
Thank you for that question. So I think it's important to note that because this levy is very specific as to what it is spent on, it's going to be funding these hundreds of positions, right? And so I'm extremely confident that the money from the levy will go to classrooms, to ensuring that kids have the support academically and with staffing, support socially and emotionally to be able to be successful in our schools. But I know that without the levy, to lose over 650 staff means that some of the schools that I've worked at will lose almost 7 or 8 staffers. This, coupled with the federal government allocating less towards Title I schools and us having more Title I schools or schools that qualify for Title I, we just have this need, less funding federal government, and we're going to need our community to continue to stand up for us, support us, and pass this levy. As much as I have my differences with the district and the conversations we're having, one thing that I can say is that the conversations I've had with Myung and Dr. Husk around our budget have been really illuminating, and we've been able to have conversations about where are some places that we still have concerns around spending that they're looking into. So, the concerns are still there, but that's not about this levy. This levy will go to staff. It will go to the kinds of people that actually help our kids every single day, and we need it to pass in order to make sure that our kids get what they deserve.
Yeah, thank you, Angela, for saying that. I'd like to say Angela and I have a very short amount of time to get to know each other, but we've made some firm commitments to continuing open dialogue and leaning in with trust first as we ask hard questions of each other. This is my 4th time running a school district. It's the largest one I've run and by far the largest budget I've ever run. And I'm sure there every day, just like every organization, there's some small things we could find that we could do better. This is a well-run district, and it's going to be a very challenging year in terms of balancing the budget. But I'm very proud of the work that the finance team and the rest of the cabinet have done to come in with good recommendations that are very hard for everybody to do so we can maintain programs for kids. I'm just talking in general about balancing the budget. I had to speak up in terms of the finance team and the business team. It's a well-run district.
And I guess I want to just add, because voters are going to ask, is none of this can go into administration. It gets put in a sub account, and then every year the Community Budget Review Committee provides a report to the board and essentially to the public on how the money is spent. And I know, Jeremy, you have the run from where what each school got from last year's local option, but we get that every year. So that's the other sort of transparent accountability mechanism, and people can see actually, for example, Scott School got X number of staff, Creative Science at Bridger got X number. So it's not that it just goes into the whole pot and you don't see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm happy to send that along if you are interested in school by school funding from the levy.
That sounds great. I think I'm pretty much all set. Does Julia Silverman, do you have any questions? Or
Yeah, thanks. So, this is interesting because I was, as Dr. Husk mentioned, just at PPS headquarters today, listening to the conversation about next year's budget. And it sounds like there will probably be about somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 fewer FTE in the district, roughly 100 or so fewer FTE in school-facing positions. And that doesn't, of course, mean necessarily 100 layoffs, because some of those are covered by attrition. But I guess my question is really for Angela and also for everybody, but first for Angela, how do you, is there more that the district could be doing to prevent that from happening? And how do you square those layoffs with asking people, you're at the same time, you're going to be saying, okay, we're cutting staff from your schools, but also please pay money on your property taxes for our schools. Like, aren't people going to say, well, wait a minute, I thought I took care of this. Why are there still cuts happening at my school?
Angela, can I say just two things that I opened up with? I know you weren't at the meeting earlier today. We've got three things coming together on the regular budget, the revenue. One is the declining enrollment. Second is the fact that we will not have ESSER funds. And third is rising costs. And the rising costs, you can see it all around the state, all around the nation. It's not related to any one event. We definitely love all of our employees. We want all of our employees to be strongly supported, to live in this wonderful community. But we also just have in general inflation. This topic of a school levy is separate from those other three things.
I know, but just for the average voter, it's all of one, right? Like, what they see is, are there going to be budget cuts at my kid's school? That's what many people will see. And that's how many people will think about this.
I'll let Angela answer, but I'm hoping that the Oregonian makes this so crystal clear that they'll understand they're two separate things.
Yeah, and it's, we understand that frustration, but just like we started this conversation, everyone understands this is a state funding issue. So we're asking for these funds while also having to make, while the district is making reductions in staffing, because we know we are underfunded, right? So this is about battles in this longer stretch where we are going to be continuing to fight and advocate for fully funded schools in Salem. But at this point, we need to use the tools that we have in order to try to stop the harm from being as great as it could be. It's very similar to what we experienced with the SSA funds, right? We had this awesome funding stream that came in. We were going to have additional social workers, counselors, which we increased, but really was just a stopgap because we then had to deal with COVID closures. And those additional staff helped us support students who were in a crisis because we were in a globalized trauma, right? But it could have done so much more if we didn't have to experience that. This is similar to this. I mean, we have to pass this levy to make sure that we minimize the possible harm from those three aspects. I mean, I think, again, the reduction in federal funds for the Title I schools, the fact that costs are going up. I think it's important for us to recognize that this isn't the be all end all, and we ask for this Portland levy and then we, dust off our hands and we say, we're done, everything's great. This is one of the steps that we need to take to sustain where we are in order to then fight for more funding, more support, and a fully funded quality education model across the state.
I'm also going to add I think we were, this was a point of, agreement between our educators at PAT and the board and the district last fall was we are going to, with the amount of money that we received, we were definitely going to be making cuts this spring. And we're, we know that we're going to make cuts next year because what the legislature gave us was this less than sort of a current service level to be able to just continue things on. In addition, I think, like I say, it's, as Sandy said, it's a combination of many things. So if you look at our enrollment, just, as our enrollment goes down, that impacts schools in, just across the board. We also had this, the last year of federal funding. So for example, one of the ways that we tried to have some equity last year of schools that didn't have foundations is there was about $8 million in ESSER dollars or COVID dollars that went out to schools that they could spend as if like it was foundation dollars that people used that schools use to purchase staff. And that money is not going to be in next year's budget. I mean, that was the last year of the federal funding. So, and we made decisions also based on coming out of COVID, like what are some of the expenditures that we know we need to make that maybe we wouldn't have made but for COVID, like doubling down on summer school and all the other things that our students still need that are a result of coming out of COVID, which is part of the like rising costs. We know the impact on students from COVID and being out of school continues forward.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just comment. This levy just helps us tread water. If we don't get to fully fund it from the states, we're drowned. And so I look at this levy is help us tread water right now, and we need it in order to do that. But the real fight and the real issue is going to be our state funding model.
Great. Anyone else have any more questions? We okay? Okay, great. I think, do you guys want to do like just kind of any wrap up on again, kind of like clarifying any other points or why voters should support this? I think Julia.
Yeah, I was gonna close by saying, since 2000, the Oregonian has supported all of our operating asks, and it makes a big difference. So we'd ask for the Oregonian's editorial endorsement. We'll spend the money wisely. It'll be focused on the classroom. It's an essential part of our budget, and we also think it's an essential part of being able to offer what we know our students need especially coming out of COVID. So just hope that you can provide editorial support for what we think is a fiscally responsible ask, given it's just it's a renewal.
Great. Well, thank you again for taking the time. We appreciate it. If I have any further questions, Jeremy, I'll just follow up with you.
Yep.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.